top of my head. Alcoholism. Is Angela an alcoholic?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I originally wrote her with the idea that she probably was an alcoholic. But you know what happens when you're writing is that as you write, the characters develop, they change, they have awakenings, they stumble and fall. And by the time I got sort of 3/4 of the way through the book, I thought, she's not really an alcoholic. She's drinking alcoholically, but I think that's a situational issue with her. I'm what they call a real alcoholic. I've been sober since March 21st, 1995. And I could not get sober by myself. I tried to and tried to and tried to. I don't know how many times. Excuse me, my dog believes this is his time, this time of day, so he will interrupt, won't you, my love? But I couldn't stay stopped. It's that old joke about quitting is easy. It's just staying quit that's a problem. So for me, there was something happened physiologically to me when I had my first drink, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. And we alcoholics, we talk about the click that goes off in your head when you get that first smack of alcohol in you, and it's like the world just, it looks different, it feels different, you feel different, you behave differently, you think you understand the universe in ways you didn't before. I don't think that's what happened to Angela. I think that Angela was in a very bad emotional spot, and part of the delusion that she was under, that passion was going to solve her problems and fill that great emptiness in her, part of that glamour, if you will, involved alcohol. The passion of the bohemian life, right? And so I think she abused alcohol, but I don't think that she was an alcoholic. I think it was a symptom. And well, I think alcoholism is a symptom of deeper problems in all of us. But I also think that the way she used alcohol was a symptom of a very specific spiritual problem that she was encountering. How did it strike you as you read it?
Well, as I read it, I didn't see her as an alcoholic. We have this theory going around the circles of people and stories that I work with, the seniors especially, that an alcoholic is born an alcoholic. I mean, it's just in you. Like you said, you get that hit and lets you know that there it is. And
where have you been all my life? Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So I didn't see that with Angela also.
Yeah. Okay.
I talked to a couple of people and they said, she drank too much. She was an alcoholic. So I said that would be one of the things.
Well, I think, to be clear, I also think you can drink yourself into being an alcoholic. I think that is absolutely possible. I've known people who, they drank pretty reasonably, most of their lives. And then as they got older or something happened, they started drinking, and the next thing you knew, they were at that place where they could not stop drinking. And as I always say, it's not about how much you drink or how often you drink, it's whether you drink in spite of the consequences. And with Angela, she was drinking in spite of the consequences for a while, but then there was a certain point at which the consequence was so enormous that she just said, I'm done. This has to stop. So, I mean, in some ways, the question as to whether or not she was an alcoholic or not, or is an alcoholic, is less important than how do any of us deal with that sort of gaping wound in us, that craving, that dissatisfaction. I think that's a kind of a more interesting question.
And the idea that she had such a traumatic experience that it stopped her from drinking. Shan and I have a small discussion on what's going to happen to her now? Is she finished this type of lifestyle, or is this just a moment in time where she's pausing?
What do you think?
Well, myself, I think that she's taking the time to actually go inside of herself, to really reevaluate who she is and what she is, and take the time to actually be herself. Because, first she was her mother's child, and then she became Phil's wife. And that whole idea of him controlling everything. And she went along with it of course, because that's what she felt she needed at that time. But, eventually she just decides enough is enough. And she goes about it in such a crazy way. I mean, the whole idea of her stepping out with someone else, that's when the morals kick in, and you as a reader, where do your morals lie also?
Don't do that. What do you think, Rita? What's your sense on where Angela is at the end of the story? You're muted. You're muted.
I think one of the key things that happens is when she goes to the beach. And in that time where she goes to the beach and she walks the beach, and she has a kind of come to the truth moment with the story of her mother, and things get rearranged inside her, is the beginning of a spiritual awakening. And so I think there's I think that's what's wonderful, is it's not Eileen telling her anything. It's her experience that enables her to move. All Eileen did was encourage her to go have one. Go
well, I think Eileen does more than that. I think Eileen listens to her in a way that other people have not.
That's true.
And I think that she gives her space for a different experience, right? Because she does help her in quite, demonstrable ways. I mean, not just that she sort of offers her counsel, but she helps her find a place to live when she needs one. And, so she gives her that sort of safety space in which to investigate who she's going to be. And so that allows her the vulnerability of that moment you're talking about on the beach, because what without giving too much away, she does this, because not everybody's read the book, I'm assuming. But she's this is a very dissatisfied woman who tends to volunteer as a way of making herself feel better about the life that she's in, which is not to say that she doesn't really have concern for the people she's working with. She does, but she's also there for for more narcissistic reasons. She's very dissatisfied in her marriage. She adores her son, but he's off having a life of his own, and suddenly crops this huge, big, beautiful Dane with these glacier blue eyes and all of this charm. I think he might be a little hard to resist if your life was stable, and hers certainly isn't. And so she sort of throws herself into this passion as a way of fulfilling all of these other things that she's not finding in her life. And unfortunately, that carelessness, in that sort of Great Gatsby way of being careless about other people and your own desires first, leads to catastrophe that involve other people. And she's not sure that she can face up to the responsibilities, to being accountable for what she has done and how she has done it, meaning, of course, who she actually is. So she does have this moment where she, because a lot of the second half of the book is really about, is she going to survive herself or isn't she? And when she has this moment, she's at a point where she has to make a decision about this. Is she going to stand clear in the light of who she is, free and liberated to accept whatever may come, which is something that I've learned from Sister Rita, that ability to discern and be free with whatever is the next right thing to do, even if it's an uncomfortable thing. And when she's at the beach, she remembers talking to her mother, who was a very problematic person herself, and in some ways sort of the female embodiment of Karsten, because just as Karsten is a Peter Pan character who won't grow up and has no intention of growing up, and I think we've all known guys like that, her mother is sort of that person in a female body, right? That she sort of defines herself in this youthful sexual way. And so Angela is repeating all of these patterns in her life. And then she remembers her mother telling this story about soft-shelled crabs. And I'm one of those people, I read a lot of natural science, and so I read this thing about soft-shelled crabs and how they get to be soft-shelled crabs, which is horrifying, okay? It's just absolutely horrifying. These poor little guys, they get to a point where they can't live in their shells anymore. Their shells are too small for them. And so they have to get out of there and grow a new shell, right? But they have to leave behind the safety of this nice hard crust that they've got over them, this armor, and scuttle around naked and vulnerable, and then until they grow a new one. And I thought, oh my God, that's the perfect metaphor for somebody who really has outgrown this hard, confining shell that they've been in. But there are dangers involved, in going out on that way. There are all sorts of things that will harm you if you're not really careful. You are at the mercy of so much. And yet, at a certain point in our lives, those of us who've dealt with addiction, who've dealt with other great traumas in our lives, there comes a point where you say, well, what choice have I got? I'm going to die here, or I'm going to maybe die there, but maybe there's a chance. Right. And that's the faith. That's where, whatever that means to you, whatever that means to you, there's that faith, that step toward life. And I think, and it was meaningful for me that it came from a story her mother told her.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because it defeats the all or nothing sense of any character being all bad or all negative. If it's not one thing, it's your mother, which
Right.
that blaming, and that there are these precious moments that can yield life, even when so many other things have been wrong in a relationship. It's not all bad. And so I think, so for me in the book, there are so many stories of what we would call redemption, of things being made new in a life-giving way.
That's good to hear.
Sister Eileen, how does Sister Eileen fit into the feelings of Detective Danberg?
Right.
He sees
Poor
her
old
and
Detective
immediately
Danberg.
it just, that just sets him right off as soon as he sees her.
Yeah, he takes one look and none, and he's triggered all over the place, right? And I will tell you that there have been people who have responded to the book that way, who, friends of mine, writers I know, I admire greatly, and who've just said to me, oh, I don't want anything to do with this book. My feelings about Catholicism, I can't, I'm not going there, right? And I thought, well, actually, if the book is about how we are challenged to love even the difficult, if there's a character in this book, either one of the characters you find difficult, maybe that's the point of the book, right? Maybe that's kind of what it's about. And Rita and I have had conversations over the years about this idea of wrestling with an angel, and how you kind of, it's through wrestling with an angel sometimes that you get bent into shapes you might not ordinarily find yourself in. And we all sometimes need angels to wrestle with. That there is a lasting effect from having wrestled with an angel, as Jacob knows from his scarred hip. And I think that for these two women, both of them are wrestling with an angel, because Eileen is problematic for Angela, and Angela is problematic also for Eileen. And it's because they stay in relationship that they're able, as Rita and I have talked about, to find mutual healing. That it's not just one person being healed by another, but the sacredness comes from both of them being healed. So I think that's that's part of what Eileen is wrestling with, and also what she brings as a character in the story. It would have been much less problematic in some ways to have simply a nice older relative or a friend or someone, but the fact that it was a woman religious to me was important, partly because until I met Sister Rita, what now, 15 years ago? Must be, right? I never met a nun in my life. I mean, I'm not Catholic. I've not been raised Christian. I know nothing about nuns. And when I was in a particularly dark period in my life, both of my brothers committed suicide. And after the second brother committed suicide, a friend of mine said, you should go talk to Sister Rita. And I'm like, a Catholic nun, much like my friends have done with this book. Oh, Catholic nuns, I'm not doing that. And I said, why would I go and see a Catholic nun? I'm not Catholic. And they said, oh, Sister Rita doesn't care if it's that. She just cares that you're okay. And really in desperation, I went to talk to her and found this remarkable spirit who forgive me for saying this, Rita, you're remarkable regardless, I'm sure. But a lot of what is remarkable about Rita is remarkable because she has worked within this discipline, this faith discipline, her whole life. That was a very new thing for me. And so a lot of the language she brought to it, I found both compelling and sort of astonishing, and so much similarity, between friends of mine who are, devout Muslims or devout Jews or who are, devout Buddhists. I mean, there's so much at the center of that is the same. But when I started to write this book, I thought, well, if I'm going to write a nun, I need to know more than I just know. And so Rita very kindly arranged for me to go and stay with some nuns who run a retreat house, the Sisters of Sacred Heart of Jesus, isn't it? At the St. Raphaela Center. And so I, for a while I was there and I did what they do. I got up when they got up, I prayed when they prayed, and mostly I worked when they worked, which meant I scrubbed the toilets, I, cleaned the kitchens, I, served the meals. I mean, these women were up at, 6 o'clock in the morning and they would go to bed at 9 o'clock at night, and they were moving all the way through. I was exhausted. And I think I was one of the younger members there. I was exhausted. Where is my 2 o'clock in the afternoon nap, right? But there was this moment when I was in the kitchen after dinner and we were all, cleaning these great big pots and this and that. And they're very quiet. I thought, what a quiet going on here. And so I asked one of the nuns, is this normal to, and she said, well, we're praying, and so while they cleaned the pot or while they cooked the food, they put prayers into it, so that whoever was served food from this pot may be granted peace and may be granted healing. And may the people who, eat this food be granted peace and may they be granted healing, whatever their prayers were. And I thought, there's something so, I have friends who, work in, sort of earth-based and even Wiccan traditions. And it's like, yeah, that's the same spirit, this putting goodness into something so that it can be retrieved by others. There's something really profound about that, and about being in relationship in this way. So I wanted that to be part of the story, and also part of the contrast between these two women, because not only is there a contrast in sort of the way they perceive passion and compassion, but there's also there's contrast in the books about the materially wealthy and the materially poor, right? As you talked about, there are balances between the genders, between the races, all of these things to juggle and come to terms with. And that's a world that both of these women approached in very, very different ways. And it was through having both those lenses focus on the same thing that something new was born, in a way.
Well, thank you. So can you give us an excerpt? You read an excerpt.
Well, I will. I'll do a little reading, and it's interesting because a bit of that business about the pots and the prayers comes into this. So just a very short reading. Sister Eileen stood at the kitchen counter chopping onions. Onion skins, she thought. That's what we used to call airmail letter paper. Her great Aunt Kate, something of a family rebel way off in County Sligo, wrote letters on such thin blue paper. She wrote about warriors and druids, banshees, Balor of the evil eye, and the Cailleach, a wild and willful female goddess who made the stones and the storms. Eileen's mother would scan the letters with a snort of derision and toss them in the trash, muttering about godless pagans. Eileen, however, would rescue them, ferret them away, and read them. She found no sacrilege in the old tales and the spirits of sky and earth, not then and not now. What was all the world and everything in it, after all, except a metaphor for God, who spoke in the language of whomever God sought? And didn't God seek us all? But no one wrote letters any longer, did they? They texted. Texts. Yes, there was Angela's face floating in front of her. Angela texting Karsten, even though he was only a few yards away, working in the same once blasted piece of land. Karsten texting her back. And then the smile, the giggle, the blush. Angela. There was a force of nature. Eileen scraped the onions into the pot with a dab of olive oil and set to chopping the carrots and celery. A soup needed a good base, something homey and solid, seemingly plain, but without which it would be thin as gruel. Cooking was so simple and such a prayer. She stirred the soup clockwise, for that brought good things, and she prayed, for that put God into the food. A little bit of kitchen witchery there. Keeping Angela in mind, she stirred and prayed that God's plan for the good of all might be made reality, unsure God was even listening. How long had it been since she'd felt the actual presence? Months, certainly years, yes. Now all she felt was the terrible, agonizing silence. A woman could let tears drop into the soup to salt it, but that would bring sorrow to those who ate it, wouldn't it? She felt a pang of guilt for introducing Angela and Karsten and sent that, along with a pinch of salt, into the soup, and so on to God. Guilt wasn't useful. It was too self-absorbed. Well, whatever happened was now in the hands of the God she trusted. Even now, even so.
You want to take a question? So I'm going to turn it over to Shan.
Okay,
Okay.
we can take questions from the public now.
Okay.
Please see.
You know, one of the things, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, one of the things that I thought was interesting about this book is, you know, like most books, you know, you write a book and then it sits on a shelf for a while, then it goes to your agent, then your agent sits on it for a while, and then it comes back and he sends it out to an editor and it sits over there for a while, and then they keep it for a year or so, and then it comes back to you. And by the time it came back for edits, I read the end of the book and I thought, oh my God, this is awful. It was terrible. It was terrible. And I had to rewrite like the last quarter or more of the book, because exactly what we were talking about in the beginning, Pat, where you said that she's done the work and she's, you know, she's come to this place in herself. She had not done that in the draft that I originally turned in. She had not done that. It was all, you know, it was much quicker. She, you know, there was this representation where she would, you know, she had done something to physically ameliorate, make better the life of the person that she had harmed. But she hadn't taken that soul journey she needed to take. Rita, you should never have let me send it off that way. We have to talk about your editing, madam. And it was interesting for me to go back and be able to do that, you know, and to really sink down into that place of where you need to forgive yourself. And this is the other thing, is the reason that I was able to do some of that was because of Sister Kathleen, who is a sister of St. Joseph, who Rita put me in touch with, who is the chaplain up at the Women's Pen at Enna McMahon. And so she was able to give me a lot of insight into what was going on up there. So like there's this network of nuns out there, you know, you may not always see them, but they're getting the work done. It's quite amazing. Camden, Trenton, Philly, Newark. I mean, they're everywhere. And, you know, they get the work done. They get it done quietly and efficiently. I'm really impressed. And I thank them for it.
Thank you, Lauren. We do have one question coming from anonymous, one of the anonymous attendees. He or she said, great session, so grateful to Trenton Library. Lauren, I have read some of your other books as well as Even So. And you seem to have a theme of addressing us with them. Can you tell us about this theme?
Yeah, I think us, us versus them is a big theme in all my work. I'm always, I've been interested. I grew up in a family with a lot of mental illness and some addiction, and left home at 16. I was on my own at 16 for a number of reasons. And so I've spent a lot of time either being someone who has been marginalized for one reason or another, or with other people who have been marginalized for one reason or another. And I'm always curious about what it is that makes somebody the other. Like what makes us and them? What is that? I mean, I've met people in Princeton who say that they won't go to Trenton. It's like, what do you mean you won't go to Trenton? Go to Trenton. You can walk there from here. I mean, it's not a there, right? It's not somewhere else. You're not going by boat. You know what I mean? You're walking down the road. But there's this sense that, that those people, well, who are those people? And so sometimes what I like to do is I like to take a bigger theme about, as I did specifically with Our Daily Bread, which is about two communities of people, one on the mountain, people who've been pilloried and cast out and for generations, and what that does to a community, and the people down in the town below who are very self-righteous, and what it means and what happens to both those communities as a result of being ostracized that way. But really what I'm asking is, who's the other in your own life? Who do you consider to be the other? Who's them? And I mean that, who's them nationally? Who's that in our community? But also, who's that in our family? Who's that on our street? Right. And so I sometimes, if we, I find in books, if you ask a bigger question, then it's easier to kind of bring it down to a smaller question. Start with a macro view, and although of course what you're doing is you're talking about those individual people in a very small view about a big subject, and then contracting and expanding. But I find sometimes it's easier for people to talk about that, because that's the way it's easiest for me to explore it for myself. Who do I think is the other, and why am I responding to this person that way, and how do I respond when somebody has decided I'm the other? All right, what do I do with that? How do I let that be?
And I think, Lauren, that there's an alternative presented, which is, what if you think of each one as the dear neighbor?
Yes.
That there's an alternative way of being together in our differences.
Yep. Absolutely. Which is at the heart of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Right. What's your maxim?
Well, it's that we give ourselves to the love of the dear neighbor without distinction, from whom we do not separate ourselves. That's why living on State Street was such a privilege for me, because I got to be near.
Right.
Not separate from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you both. The next question we have is for Sister Rita. Even so, Sister Eileen had a crisis of faith. Does this happen to many nuns?
I think what Eileen had wasn't, I guess I wouldn't call it a crisis of faith, but it certainly was a challenge when God is the God that God wants to be, and not the God you want God to be, which is a challenge for all of us at any moment. And so for her, that because she had suffered abuse, because she had suffered the family trauma she had suffered, the biggest wound is to trust in all of those situations. And so the God of love, who she knew, who invited her to comfort, then also invited her to make the difficult journey to trust, to continue to trust that the love was still there. And so what seems mean of God is really a love that wants us to have the fullness of human experience that we may have been deprived of because life was harsh. So I think that's much more.
Yeah, I think this idea of the silence of God or the dark night of the soul, I think that's something that a lot of religious people go through. Wouldn't you say, Rita? And I mean, I think it's something that people who aren't religious go through as well. We just call it something different.
Midlife crisis.
Sometimes a midlife crisis, right? Or depression, or existential crisis, or But I think that idea of the silence of the cosmos, because a lot of times I think when we talk about God, we each have a definition of God which may be different, and for some, that's a word that is triggering. Right. But whatever it is that we relate to in the universe, if that suddenly goes silent, or if we feel we've devoted ourselves to something and then had a disillusionment within that, that's hard. That's hard times. But often that's where, and as somebody who does suffer from depression, when you fall down into that pit, if you don't flail around all the time, just desperately trying to get out, but actually stop and take a look and see what's around, sometimes you find some pretty extraordinary things down there in the bottom of the mine, right? So I think that's also, as Rita's saying, letting God be God, and trusting that even though you don't hear, or God's not being the God you think it should be, God should be, that you can maintain a trust in that, whatever it is.
Can I follow up? Because there's a question here about silence. Silence in many families is a form of punishment. So there are silences in our homes that means you're in trouble.
Right.
There are silences that mean I'm not so sure I love you anymore. And so silence can have that history. Silence also is the wonderful ability to sink into quiet. But what silence will do is we armor our hearts when we're hurt. Silence penetrates that armor, and some of the stuff that comes up isn't pretty. And so silence is a powerful transformative tool that can be both comforting and disconcerting. So I hope that answers the question on silence.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, good. Okay, we have a question about the character of Angela seems to have an enviable life in Princeton and blows it up. How have your fellow Princeton residents reacted to this character, and how her life in Princeton is portrayed? Oh, none of them speak to me. They haven't done in years, so I'm fine with that. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. I think they're fine with it, right? I think they're fine with it. I think I have a lot of wonderful friends here, and I think we all know that dissatisfaction and that soul hunger can come from anywhere. This one just happened to come from Princeton. I think we've all known people, male and female, who have, as a friend of mine said, my husband said he needed to throw a grenade into the trench of his life, to which she replied, "Did you forget that the kids and I were also in that trench?" I mean, this is something that unfortunately happens not infrequently. So it happened to be here. But I think the other thing is that, people seem to be getting quite a kick out of reading about places they know about. So whether they're reading, they see a restaurant they know, or they know that street, or they recognize something. People, it's fun to do that, right? I mean, I love that. When I read books about any place that I've ever lived, it's always lovely to to be able to put yourself in that. So people have been very kind. How are we doing here?
There's a question in the chat.
Pardon me.
About the possibility of reunion and reconciliation between Angela and her son.
Mm.
And were you tempted to go further? That I don't.
Yeah, my sense is that you know, as the relationship between Angela and her mother was fraught, you know, I think that, you know, it is only truthful that a young man who has been through this with his mother, I mean, not only, and this is public, you know, she did a public thing. I mean, you know, she didn't just go off and have an affair. It got real public. And I think he was deeply, deeply horrified by it. And also, I think, you know, people at that age, at least I at that age, oh, I was righteous. Good Lord, I was righteous. You know, I understood, you know, morality in all forms. And, you know, I was going to explain to you what was wrong with you and what you were doing. You know, that was my job in life, right? Thank God I'm old now. But I think it will take time with them. And I think, you know, this story was specifically about these two women and their own reconciliation with themselves and their particular problems. There is probably another book to be written about a mother and a son who survived that kind of a trauma. That's not this book, but I did want to put in enough that there would be that the reader might conclude that healing will continue, particularly because Angela is willing to let the healing take whatever form Connor needs it to take. She's not going to try and superimpose her agenda on that. And she's learned that the hard way.
There is a question coming in. What a fascinating discussion. I have not read the book, but I cannot wait to dive in. Can you tell us a little more about the influence Sister Rita have on Lauren's writing?
Well, you know, Sister Rita has been a touchstone for me. For just stick your fingers in your ears for a few minutes, Rita. But you know, it has been a touchstone for me for a long time. And I think creativity for me is a spiritual practice. Writing is a spiritual practice. It is a vocation. It's not a career. It's a vocation. Would I like it to be more successful? I would, quite frankly, but I try to be faithful to the vocation of writing, and I'm not sure I could have done that over the past 15 years without Rita in my life, and the wisdom that her faith brings to my life. So apart from the very practical details about what does it mean when a nun does this and how does a nun do that and would a nun do this or say this or what are they, you know, like there was this question around the book about, you know, Sister Eileen knows certain things that have happened that perhaps the police do not know, and what's her responsibility and what, you know, what's the answer to that within a religious community and how do we navigate all of that. So she was an incredible resource for me in terms of the practical details of this book. But from a more, you know, from a wider sense, as a human being and as a creative person, I'm not sure I would still be writing books if it wasn't for Rita's, the space that Rita has allowed me to grow in. And, you know, Rita's question, which I love and repeat all the time, is, well, what's the invitation? What's the invitation? You know, and that's changed very much the way I look at various events that happen in my life, not as this problem or, you know, how could they or why did they or why me or any of the rest of that, but what is the invitation? It's such a life affirming and spirit affirming open door to be able to walk through. It's an enormous gift to me, as Rita is to many, many people. You know, years ago, I read a book called Father Joe. I can't remember who wrote it now. He's an actor and I think rock musician in Britain. And he had been sent off to this priest, Father Joe, when he was a kid because he was acting out. And Father Joe became his lifelong spiritual advisor. And he lived a very famous life, and he did some very terrible things in his life and some good things. It was a drug addict and blah, blah, blah. And every time he'd go back to see Father Joe would say the same thing. Are you being kind? Are you being kind? Are you being kind? Big, huge, knobbly old man. And when he died, Tony Hendrick, that's the guy who wrote it. Tony Hendrick went to his funeral. He lived in this little island off the coast of England, and was gobsmacked to find that Princess Diana was there, and like all these really famous people, and that that Father Joe had been spiritual advisor to all of these people, and Father Joe made him feel that he was the only one in the world. So I get the feeling, not that we're planning on having it happen anytime soon, Rita, but should there come a day when we come to honor you, I'm going to be really annoyed to find out the millions of people who show up for that, because I know darn well that the ripples of her influence go far and wide and deep, I may say. I'm extremely grateful to her.
Thank you. The next question. Hi, Lauren. I've read about you teaching writing. Does teaching help you be a better writer? And how long does it take to write a book?
Yeah, I do teach. I used to have a writing class here in Princeton. I mean, I've taught, in Europe, I've taught in, Canada and universities and that sort of stuff. And I had a writing class, monthly writing class that I did here for a long, long time. I'm not doing that anymore. I do mentor some MFA students from time to time. The one thing I found, writing makes you a much better, teaching makes you a much better writer for a number of reasons. One is because you have to edit other people's work, and you have to explain to them why something's not working. So you have to be able to guide them to what is working, and then you have to be able to explain to them what's not working and why isn't it working. And having to articulate that in someone else's work means when it comes time for your own work, you have a better chance of doing it for yourself, although you can never really do brain surgery on yourself, and we all writers need editors. But it does, you're constantly talking about, well, how does structure work, and how does dialogue work, and how does how does foreshadowing work, and what does psychic distance mean? So if you are talking about those things and trying to explain them to other people and help them master those tools, then when you come to, particularly to go and work on your own, once you got that first draft out, it's incredibly useful. Now, how long does it take to write a book? Well, it depends on the book. This one took me 4 years, 5 years, which is about an average for me, about 4 or 5 years for a book. The only book that I wrote quickly was it's called The Empty Room. And it is a book in which I speculate what might have happened to me, where I would be now had I not stopped drinking in '95. And so luckily I knew the character fairly well in that book, since it was more or less based on me. And I was able to go back and mine some of my past. So that book got written in about 6 months. And that still shocks me that I was able to do that. I'd love to do that again, but I don't seem to be able to do it. Although, and if you do read it, not all of it is autobiographical. I was doing a reading once, and I was talking about the autobiographical bits, and I said, but there is this scene in a jazz bar in Toronto where the protagonist projectile vomits all over a bunch of people. And I said, that wasn't me. That never happened. I never did that. And there was a guy in the back of the room who went, no, that was actually me. And I thought, oh, my people are here.
We have more questions here. Question 1 for Sister Rita. In the story, Sister Eileen seeks to help Angela even though she doesn't approve of her behavior. Don't most people tend to avoid helping those they don't like or feel don't deserve it? How can any of us rise above our gut reaction to judge others?
I come from psychologically the teaching that love is a choice. It's not a feeling. So, and then in my faith tradition, it's really important. There's a piece in Matthew where they ask Jesus about the one he believes in, and he says he makes the sun rise and the rain fall on the just and the unjust. And then he says to the people who ask him the questions, be perfect that way. So for me, my faith tradition challenges me precisely to love people where they are as they are. And yeah, do I have reactions? Do I have likes and dislikes? Yes. But that says more about me than it does about them. You know, that says more about my expectations. The other thing I've learned is people, no child comes into the world wanting to be bad. You know, no child comes into the world with that. And so whatever people are doing or choosing, you know, I pray for whatever is in them that isn't that, to be liberated. So it's a conscious choice. And so no, like our sisters don't like that people are you know, using heroin and fentanyl and stuff like that. But we're not going to leave Kensington, you know, in Philly. We're not going to leave those people, and we're not going to treat them like they're garbage, because they're not. They are a beloved creation. And so
and the same, I suppose, would also be true not only of the people who are addicted to heroin and fentanyl,
right,
but to the people who got them addicted, and the
and the
people who sold it to them, and the
exactly,
people who are
and the people who are ignoring the problem. I have
right,
to love them too, and that's
right.
a hard one.
And that
That's
family
really the hard
who
one.
made billions on fentanyl, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
that's
I
the
have
hard
to
one for
love
me.
them.
That's
And
the hard one
like,
for me.
and frequently I say to God, you love these people the way they are. That's why they call you God.
That's right. Yeah. We're gonna let you take that one.
No, and so yeah, you know, you and in the 12 steps they teach you to pray, you know, bless them, change me. Bless them, change me.
Yeah.
There's a part in there for you, Lauren.
Oh yeah, and Lauren, you wrote this. I did. So you clearly understand these types. Do I clearly understand these types of situations? I don't know. Have you? Do you rise above these type of feelings? Oh, probably not. I think I try. You know, I think I try to. I think I fail most of the time. You know, as you know, I make no secret of the fact that I've been in recovery, as I say, for all of these years, and people, especially in early sobriety, are difficult. Oh, some of those folks are difficult. Not that I ever was, of course. Absolute angel. You know, but that's what I try and remember too, is, you know, what about if I'm the difficult person, right? It's not always them that are difficult. Sometimes I'm the difficult person. So but it means different things too. You know, one of the things that I've learned is that loving someone doesn't even necessarily mean staying in relationship with them. Sometimes that love manifests itself as having to walk away and let somebody else handle that problem, you know, for them, or help them with it, or give them the space. You know, I can't. And you know, this, you know, I've taught in prisons as well as universities, and you know, there have been times when, you know, there were you know, I'm thinking of two people in particular who I love very much, and in both cases I had to say, you got to lose my phone number, because it wasn't safe for them, and it wasn't safe for me, and that's not what God, whatever that is, wants, right? You know, when being in a relationship with me is only making you worse, you know, it's making your life worse, it's making you do things that are going to get you in trouble again, then we can't be in relationship right now. All right, so it's a complicated question, you know, and one that causes me not an inconsiderable amount of grief, and I think that's okay too. You know, that's okay too. I can trust that something greater than me is going to be able to handle what I can't, right? You know, as you know, Sister Rita talks about, you know, pray for what you can do, and then also to know what you can't do, You know, what's not yours? You know, which pair of mittens does not have your name in it, right? And you know, sometimes that's hard to discern. But if you believe that there is something benevolent at work in the universe, then it's got to be there for everybody, not just me. And I'm not yet, right? I mean, that's the other thing that we say in recovery. You know, the one thing I need to know about God is that I'm not God. And I think that's fairly clear.
And two things along that go with that. The one is, how free am I to be every face of love? So many times we put love in a box, you know, and it has to look this way. And so for you to say that sometimes it's setting a boundary or allowing a relationship, that can be, if it's done from love.
Right.
Right. That's the key. And the second thing is, when I have anger or frustration or whatever with another, I have to welcome that feeling and say, here it is. You know, here's this part of me that's angry. What's that about? What's that about? And it may be that I'm getting a taste of what it's always like for God. You know, the grief at the loss of something. So, or
you know, offering something and having just somebody say, nope, I'm
right.
just gonna. You can't drag somebody out of the tunnel.
Right.
You know, sometimes you can drag them out of the tunnel, even if the train's coming right at them, but sometimes you can't. You just, you can't. And that, if that doesn't fill you with grief, there's something wrong with your heart. And I think that's true for writers, you know, as well as everybody else. And sometimes we write characters and they will not stop doing something awful. And, you know, I've had characters die in my books, and it's like it happens out there, but it does. I mean, there's one character, I'm not going to say who it is, but it is a character in one of, but I worked for months and months and months trying to get this character not to die. I couldn't, but there was only way it was going to work was if they died. The one thing I will tell you is no dog will ever die in my books. I'm just not for it. I won't do it. And in the Grimoire of Kensington Market, there's a which is a story about addiction based on the Snow Queen, the fairy tale of Snow Queen. And there's a dog that goes with the main character through this fantastical journey. And there was a newspaper person phoned me up and said, like, you know, read the book, loved the book, but yeah, I just got to tell you, thank you so much for not killing the dog. And I'm like, kill the dog? Who would kill the dog, right? And she said, I don't know what it is about you Canadian writers, but they always kill the dog. And I'm, do they? That's horrible. And I started to look through the books that I knew. And in fact, so my tagline for that book became, the dog doesn't die. You know, so it just, you can read it. Don't worry about, the dog will be fine, right? It's going to be okay. So. People die willy-nilly, but the dog will never die.
Lauren, I just want to ask a follow-up question about this topic, because Pat and I discussed about Didi, Angela's only friend. I hope I say her name right.
Yep, Didi. Yep.
Do you think she's a real friend to Angela? Because she sort of walked away from Angela after Angela messed up everything, and she told everything to Angela's husband, Philip. Which made it worse.
Messy, huh? Complicated, yeah. Messy. People are so complicated and messy, I tell you. I think I like Didi. I like everybody in the book, including Philip, by the way. I think Philip's a guy who's trying really hard to do the right thing. But I think Didi, I think she loves Angela very much and kept her secret for a long time, hoping that she would make different choices. I think, I think it's really rough when you love two people in a relationship and one of them is clearly doing something that's causing damage. And it's one thing, sort of, well, I'll just let it, it's none of my business. I'll let it go by. I don't know. But, if the harmed party comes to you and says, am I going crazy or is this really happening? I think this is happening. I think it's pretty human to go, oh, yeah, that's happening. I think it's human. I think it's uncomfortable, but I think it's human. And I'm not so sure how much Didi walks away from her as in it is mutual. once the terrible, awful thing happens, and Angela has this almost, you know, psychotic break. I mean, she has this real breakdown. Anything having to do with her life prior to that moment, she can't go near, with the exception of Connor. You know, and even he is far away at that moment, and she doesn't, you know, even that has some space to it. But I think it wasn't a one-way street there. I think the relationship was hugely damaged, but I think it's okay at the end. You know, sometimes that happens, and I think it's okay. Do I think she was a real friend? I think she was the very best friend she could be to all involved, which doesn't mean we don't make mistakes.
Thank you. The next question we have, if Angela knew beforehand everything that would happen, including the accident, prison, what path do you think she would have taken? Get involved with Carson or stay with Philip?
I suspect that if she was who she was before all of the bad things happened, she would have thought she could control the bad things. I think she was so in that, you know, sort of addictive place of desire and need and gotta have and constant craving and all of that. I think she would have determined, and I've seen people do this. You know, it's like, honey, you know, you know, it's like as I say, it's that, you know, it's that train light coming at you from the tunnel. You can you not see the train is there? You see the train, right? Yep. I'm going in there anyways. I'm gonna be the different one. I can make it different. And I think it is a place of derangement. I think it is a place of you know, we talk about addiction as being a disease of perception. You know, we don't see things as they really are. And we don't see ourselves as we really are. We don't see other people as they really are. And I think what's happening to Angela is a kind of addiction. You know, it may not be that she's an alcoholic, but certainly there is a kind of addiction that's going on there with Karsten, who never lies to her, by the way. You know, Karsten is relentlessly who he is. Right? But she superimposes this scrim on him that isn't there. And I think that she would have I think that she would have gone for it anyways, believing she could mitigate the outcome.
And part of that, Lauren, is she has this sense of power, you know, that she's controlling this, the flow of affairs. So even if she knew where it was going, quote, it's like, it will not happen because I can control it. I have power.
Exactly.
And that's part of her delusion or illusion in that case that feeds her.
And don't you think too that even if she said, okay, well, look, if that's gonna happen, then I'm not gonna see this guy anymore. But there would be somebody.
Right.
You know, there would be somebody. Yeah.
I think that's the reason I find it's really difficult for me to love Angela. I just feel there's no rationale. I don't understand like the decision she made.
It's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think all of us have a friend or an acquaintance or somebody we know, and we see them taking these steps in their lives, and we think, you know, you just want to smack them. You just want to drag them away, but you can't. People will be relentlessly who they are. And it's hard. Yep. Rita.
Well, and the other piece is there's so much undealt with stuff inside Angela. And so she's trying to find her way through the only way she knows. And I think that the key is the unresolved things in us will come out in destructive ways. Mm-hmm. What isn't healed, the stuff in us that's not healed, her relationship with her son mirrors her relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
You know, and that was the last thing she wanted to become, an embarrassment to him. You know, so it's the unhealed stuff in us. That's why it's very generous to do the work of inner healing, to do the work of inner growth. That's why the 12 steps is such a gift to so many people, because it invites them to that with support of community.
The next question, Lauren, are you already at work on a new book? What can you tell us?
I am already at work on the new book, and I've been at work on it since pre-pandemic, which shows you how poorly it's going. Yeah, I found it really difficult to write through most of the pandemic, even to concentrate, to read, and I talked to a lot of my writer friends, and we were all saying, you know, God, are you getting anything down on paper? I mean, it's just, and part of it is not knowing what's important anymore, right? I don't know what's relevant anymore. I don't know where I come into the conversation anymore, because I can't see far enough down the line, you know, to know what's going to happen. I don't know. So, you know, you don't want to write a book that's completely out of touch with everything that's going on in the world. And yet what's going on in the world is not yet touchable for me. You know, I always, you know, when I talk to people, I say, you know, if they're writing a book, I say, if it's based on something that's going on in your own life, or you know, let it compost for a while. You've got to let it sink down. You got to let it compost and become something, you know, or let it bake in the oven, you know, whatever metaphor you want, whatever simile you want. And I don't feel that I've had that over the past year and a half. So the book has changed in a number of ways as I've been writing it. I will say, though, that for those of you who, if anybody out here has read Our Daily Bread, which is the book about the two families or two communities, one up on the top of this mountain, and a lot of meth dealing and incest going on up there, and the very righteous, you know, fundamentalist Christian community, fundamentalist Christian community in this town below. It is a sequel to that book. It's the next generation of what happens to the people who survived that story. And so a lot of it is about generational trauma. And continues to look at, you know, what makes us and what makes them. But it's also has and this is thanks to a certain cabin on a certain creek in the mountains of Pennsylvania, which has been an interesting experience being up there, I must say. It's also more about the land and the holiness and the sacred of the land and what it means to live in a relationship to that and to honor that as part of a sacred tradition. So that's also part of it. Yeah, living in the mountains of Pennsylvania. I had a discussion with somebody a little while ago about guns. Not my thing. Not a gun person here. But there are a lot of people that I love a lot up in these mountains in Pennsylvania who have guns, lots of guns, and they shoot them all the time. I mean, they shoot them at cans, they shoot them at targets. Hopefully they don't shoot them at other people, but you know, there's a lot of gun stuff going on up there. And they all think I'm insane not to have a gun in the house. They all think I'm nuts, right? They think, you know, Ron and I are crazy. What do you mean you don't have any guns in the house? You know, like, what are you going to do? When? What? I mean, has anything ever happened other than some teenager has broken in and, you know, stolen somebody's booze? I mean, you know, so what happens up there is people tend to break in and they steal the ammunition because ammunition's really expensive. And I said, this doesn't make me feel better about things in any way at all. But one of the things that I found was really interesting is I was having this discussion about guns, and somebody said, well, you know, white people, white hillbillies and their guns. What makes you think these people are white?
Yeah, right.
Right? These people, you know, some are, but some of them aren't. You know, some of them are not white. And it's this, you know, again, it's like, who's us and who's them, right? Who's us and who's them? What's the perception of somebody who, you know, who's an NRA person who likes guns? Well, they've got to be a white hillbilly, especially if they live up in the mountains. Well, no, actually, there's a large community. In fact, I would probably say a third of the community up there is not white. Right? So, you know, rattle that box a little bit, right? I find those things I find it fascinating when we, you know, even when you get caught up in your own, right? And you suddenly look down and go, oh, I didn't know that was still there. I didn't know I had that. Of course you do. You know, we live in a society where we all, you know, we all get steeped in stewed in this language of the other, whatever that may be, whether it's racial or whether it's gender or whether it's economic. That's where we all are all the time, right? And so it's, you know, none of us should be surprised that we've got a little of that. We just don't have to keep it. Right? There's no obligation to hang on to that once you discover that it's there. That's my sentiment, anyways.
The last question we have is, how do you create those well-formed characters? Do you invent them, or are they partially based on people you come across? And in your books, do you have friends or families that think you've written about? Are they correct?
Never. Well, yeah. I mean, you know, Somerset Maugham, I think said, you know, writers are not gods. We don't make things up out of whole cloth, right? So, you know, we're magpies. That's what writers are. We're magpies. We, you know, pick up a little this and that. You know, we pick up a story from over here. We pick up a, you know, a hair color, a gesture. Or, you know, that's what we do, and then we put it all, you know, let it compost, like I said, you know, let it stew around down there, and it comes out as something new. So there, I mean, you know, is Sister Eileen based on Sister Rita? There are some things about Sister Rita that are also part of Sister Eileen's story, but there are some things that are not, right? So she, you know, she is based on a person, but she's also not based on a person. And the person that she's based on is the person that I experience Sister Rita to be, right? Which is not necessarily what Sister Rita actually is. It's my perception of Sister Rita based on the relationships that we've had. It's very good, all good perceptions. I think what I find interesting, when I wrote Our Daily Bread, for example, there were people, a couple of people wanted to publish it. And the one I chose, the publisher I chose, was the publisher who would let me not say where it was, because I didn't want people to, you know, write about it in Kentucky, say, and then have people go, well, what do you expect? That's Kentucky, right? No. The whole point of the book is that you don't get to say that, right? So, and it actually was based on something that happened in Nova Scotia. And I lived in Nova Scotia while part of it was going on. I was so shocked by it that I thought it couldn't possibly be true. And later, years later, when it came out that it was true, I was horrified, because had been one of those people who said, it can't possibly be true, or else somebody would do something about it, right? So since that book came out, I get, you know, letters and emails from people. It's like, I know who you're talking about. I know where that community is, you know, and it's the Ramapo Mountains, it's Kentucky, it's the Hopewell Hillbillies. I've had people adamant that that book is about the Hopewell Hillbillies, right? It's not about the Hopewell Hillbillies, and so the same is true with characters, you know, because I think if a character is really well created, that there should be something in it that we all identify with, something. I mean, I would like to think that there's no character I've ever written that anybody, this isn't one iota that they don't think, I kind of think I get that, you know, that's kind of me. The only book that is more, well, you know, The Empty Room is sort of autobiographical in a way, but the one that's most closely based on my own reality was my first novel, which is called The Stubborn Season. And that was me exploring the tyranny of mental illness in a family, because my mother, as I said, has suffered from pretty extreme mental illness. And being an only child in that family, it's a very strange way to grow up, because nobody tells you your mom's nuts, but she's nuts. And so you're constantly in this strange area of not quite knowing what is normal and what's not, and you're hyper vigilant all the time because your life depends on it. So I wanted to write about that, but I didn't want to write just another book about a dysfunctional family, because I really didn't even want to read another book about a dysfunctional family. So my mother told the story of this little girl who lived across the street from her in Canada during the 1930s, whose mother was odd and who wouldn't let her out of the house after school and kept the house all closed up and everything, right? And I thought, oh my God, there's my story. My mother, but not my mother, not now, said it in the Great Depression. And so you have this wonderful balance between the Great Depression in the house and the Great Depression out of the house, right? And then as I was doing research for the book, I found out about the rise of fascism in Canada during the 1930s, and you know, that Montreal had its own night of breaking glass, and there were swastika waving Nazis in the streets of Toronto. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I put all of that together in this book and wrote this book that really was about the relationship between myself and my mother, but it was also about all of this other stuff, right? And then the book came out and I thought, my mother's going to kill me. Right. I mean, this is it. It's going to be over. It's death, blood on the walls. It'll be awful. First of all, I don't think she ever read it. But if she did, she never said a word. Never said a word. And that sort of thing, you know, I've had people who insist that they're in my books and they're really not. And then my mother, who was nothing. Nothing. So I think that's testament to what happens in a writer's mind, where you take something and you moosh it around and you mold it and you sculpt it, and by the time it gets onto the page, it's a very different person. Thank God.
I also think, Lauren, the richness of your characters comes not only from observation, you know, of the types of interactions, but also of your own inner work. You know, that composting isn't just thinking about other people and other characters. That composting is, you know, where do these emotions live in me, and what do they look like, and where did they come from? So a lot of your richness comes from the richness of your own inner life.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Very nice. Very kind of you. Thank you.
We're a little bit over time, so thank you again for Lauren and Sister Rita.
Thank you
for joining us on the discussion, and thank everyone for joining us tonight.
Been absolutely wonderful. And if there are any more questions, please feel free to go to my website, which is just laurenbdavis.com. Always get a hold of me there. If some question you're too shy to ask on this forum, you can always send me a message. I'm happy to answer it.
I have a few questions I have to follow up with you, Lauren, about the book.
There you go. There you go, Shanshan. It's been delightful, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Stay healthy. Stay well.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.